going to give you my favorite tournament plays for week 3 over on DraftKings. I'll talk about 3 players at each position that I have currently projecting for less than 15% ownership, guys that I have confidence in, and I'll tell you why. We're going to start with quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, $7,900. Now, he's going to come in with less than 5% ownership, or at least he's projecting that way right now, and this is because he's sandwiched right in between Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. You can see $300 less than Josh Allen, $300 more than Jalen Hurts. These guys are projecting to be the 2 highest owned quarterbacks on the slate here. So I like Mahomes. He's going to come in around 5% owned, and I think this is strictly just due to his pricing, probably a little bit to do with he doesn't have the rushing upside of these guys. Now, that needs to be noted, but what he does have is the ability to be extremely efficient, as we saw in week 1, 30 for 39. He threw for 360 yards and 5 touchdowns. He went for 38 DraftKings points, and that's without basically a 0 in the rush game. So I think that Mahomes can be considered anytime he's coming in with low ownership. I think this is a really solid week against the Indianapolis defense that doesn't scare us. He's going to come in low owned strictly because of the pricing, proximity to Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. Give me some Patrick Mahomes. So next up, we'll talk about Tua Tagovailoa. Right here, coming off a ceiling game last week, almost 44 DraftKings points. He had 50 attempts, almost 500 yards, 6 touchdowns, and threw 2 interceptions. Without those 2 interceptions, he eclipses 45 points. Just absolutely insane. Obviously, we can't expect that again. But this game environment is almost even more enticing than the Baltimore game last week. We know that the Bills are going to put up points. This game has a total of 53 points, 53 total points, and Dolphins team total is 23, almost 24 points. So we can expect them to get 3, maybe 4 touchdowns on the high end. I expect Tua to be heavily involved in those. Not to mention, I know that Buffalo has a tough defense on paper, but they're missing a ton of people in their secondary. We'll talk about one of Tua's wide receivers, and we'll get into more of the injury stuff in a second. But yeah, Tua coming off a ceiling week, I expected him to have more ownership, and the fact that he's coming in, less than 5% according to these projections, give me some Tua. I like Tua in a high-scoring environment. Next up, we'll go Marcus Mariota. This one, a little bit off the beaten path here, coming in about 5% owned. He hasn't been that great of a quarterback as far as, winning games, but we don't really care about that as fantasy players. We're just hoping he puts up points. And his rushing upside has been really nice through 2 weeks. And I know week 1 especially, 12 attempts, 72 yards, and a touchdown. That's 13 points just on the ground. 13.2 DraftKings points just on the ground, and then whatever he does passing is just a bonus. Last week only 6 attempts and only 16 yards. I think he probably most week comes in between these two numbers. 8, 9 attempts and somewhere in the neighborhood of 30, 40, maybe even 50 yards on the high end. So it gives him a really nice floor. Not to mention the first 2 weeks, tough matchups versus the Saints and the Rams. Now gets the Seahawks defense. This game may be a little slow paced. Seahawks not the most fantasy-friendly environment. However, I think Mariota is interesting, especially considering he's 5,500. Not going to come with some ownership. And I actually have one of his pass catchers that I like that we'll talk about in a bit. Let's move over to running backs. Christian McCaffrey, $8,800. Hasn't flashed the ceiling this year. And that's obviously why he's coming in a little bit lower owned than I'd expect him to, around 8% right here. You can see the opportunities have been there, especially last week. He had 20 opportunities, 15 attempts, 20 targets, over 100 yards rushing, and added 26 yards receiving. Now his upside is really going to come through the volume, especially in the receiving game. So I'm hoping that this is not, where he's going to be most weeks. Hopefully he can get into that 6, 7, even 8 target range that we really like McCaffrey to be in. I like the ownership here. The matchup is not the greatest, I will admit, but, McCaffrey's volume is always going to leave him with a 35-point upside. He has a pretty safe floor, too. I think as far as high-priced guys go, Kupp, Jefferson, Taylor, McCaffrey, it looks like all of these guys, except for Taylor, is going to project higher ownership than McCaffrey. So at the high end, I think I like the ownership discount on McCaffrey, and I like him to flash his upside sooner or later. When he's coming in less than 10% owned, I think that should always pique your interest. So I like going with McCaffrey this week. Next up, we have another expensive running back here, Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler really flashed his receiving upside. This is what we like McCaffrey to be at, right? But yeah, 10 targets, 9 receptions for Austin Ekeler. His involvement in the passing game gives him a really, really nice floor, and added 14 carries both games. The concern with the Chargers as a whole is Justin Herbert is questionable, and the recent line movement towards Jacksonville, I believe they're 3.5-point dogs now. Coming up from 7-point dogs, that would suggest that Justin Herbert is not going to play. Now, Chase Daniel is the backup for the Chargers, and he's one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league. Better backup quarterbacks, not as a whole. As far as backup quarterbacks go, you could do a lot worse than Chase Daniel. So you can make the case that the Chargers come more run heavy, or the passes that they do make are quick dump offs, which would help the running backs here. So even if Herbert is out, I'm okay taking Ekeler. Coming in 7-8% ownership feels a little low, especially if Herbert plays. But I guess if Herbert doesn't play, this 8% might hold, and I like getting Ekeler at 8% whenever possible. He's fairly priced too, so yeah, I like Austin Ekeler in this spot. Next up, 5,500, Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders' volume has been really impressive through the first 2 weeks. You can see here, in the first week he had 15 touches for over 100 total yards, and then last week 20 total touches for 86 total yards. Now, he did get in the end zone week 1, not in week 2. I think his main appeal, at least for me, is the fact that his quarterback is going to be so highly owned. Jalen Hurts is going to come 13, 14, maybe even 15% owned in single entry. Don't be surprised if that number gets up and starts flirting with 20% ownership either. But Miles Sanders is great leverage off him, especially if he can sneak a touchdown or two away from the rest of the offense. And Jalen Hurts in particular, he has a chance to be the best leverage play on the slate. And at 5,500, getting a 20-point game or 18.5 points, that's well within the realm of possibilities for him. I think he can push for 20 points. The volume's been there, even with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott getting time. So I like Miles Sanders in this spot. Eagles are on the road, but they are 6.5-point favorites. So Sanders, the game script should be in his favor. I like Sanders this spot, especially from a leverage perspective. Let's move over to wide receiver. Devonte Adams. Similar matchup to last week when he was 40% owned in some spots. His price dropped $200. He's now $8,400. The Raiders might be without Hunter Renfrow and Josh Jacobs. And for some reason, Devonte Adams is projecting for 7% ownership. This feels crazy to me. It feels like one of those spots that, the field is going to see this and catch up to it. And maybe it's because Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson on the high end are projecting a little bit better. And if people are going to pay for an expensive wide receiver, maybe they'll find the money to do that. But man, it just feels like everything's kind of lining up for Devonte. And if this sub 8% ownership holds into Sunday, I really like him. I mean, he got 17 targets in week 1, and that was with Hunter Renfrow. If Renfrow misses, that's a lot of target share opened up for the rest of the offense. If Josh Jacobs misses, it's possible that their running game isn't efficient, or they just decide to throw more than normal. So I really like Devonte. I'm going to keep an eye on this ownership throughout the week, but it really feels like if he stays at 8%, he might be my favorite wide receiver play on the slate. So keep an eye on that. $6,800. We talked about Tua earlier. This is the guy I like pairing him with. 8% ownership right now. Jalen Waddle also coming off a huge ceiling week in week 2. 19 targets, 11 catches for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns, 43 DraftKings points. Just an absolute ceiling game. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen again. If it does, great, but we're not expecting that, of course. Now, I do like him regardless of ownership, but if he's going to come in 10% owner or sub 10% owned, I really like him, especially with the injuries that I alluded to earlier. Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, Dane Jackson, all out for the Bills, and Jordan Poyer is questionable. Those are their top 4 pieces in the secondary. If Poyer misses, they're all, they're starting 4 backups in the secondary. So give me Jalen Waddle, who just ripped up Baltimore. I think Tyreek Hill is totally fine too, but he's a little bit more expensive, a little bit more ownership. I think either one of those guys is totally fine. I'll take the ownership discount and pricing discount on Waddle as my preference, but both of them, I really like both of them. So, the Miami stacks are looking hot for me. Next up, 5,100, Curtis Samuel. Now, we're right on, I think this is a little bit low. I think Samuel will probably come in around that 15% ownership threshold that we set for this video, but as of right now, projecting for slightly under 15%, so we're going to count it. Very impressive start, maybe the most surprising start for any wide receiver this season. He's got 20 total targets, 15 total catches, and a touchdown in each of the first 2 weeks. 20 plus points in each of the first 2 weeks. He is going to probably avoid the Darius Slay and James Bradbury coverage on the outside, since he plays a lot in the slot. He gets schemed the ball whenever he's in the game, so I really like him. I like his chances to have 7+ targets again with, double-digit target upside. And he's just being heavily involved right now. I do think, like I mentioned earlier, I think his ownership might get steamed up a little bit, especially for the people playing Jalen Hurts, who are going to want someone from Washington, on the other side of that game. So I do think Curtis Samuel could, get up past this 15% ownership that I kind of set the threshold in for this video. But on paper, I think that Curtis Samuel's a really solid play. Let's move over to tight end. I think this is the week for Kyle Pitts. It hasn't happened this week, it hasn't happened this year. The volume has not been there. I guess in week 1, 7 targets, that's promising, but 3 targets last week, it's just gross. It hasn't been good for Kyle Pitts, but this is why ownership is going to be down. You can see 5% ownership. I just like betting on a guy with this much talent at under $5,000 in a position, a tight end position that is really weak. And he is someone, sorry that my page isn't loading here for some reason, but he's someone that can outscore everyone in this position, and he's under $5,000 and 5% ownership. Also getting the easiest matchup he's had this year, similar to Mariota. Saints and Rams, much tougher matchup than Seattle here. So I like his chances to have his best week of the season. I know that that's not saying much. Let's see if this is working. Nope. Why would it? So I like his chances to have his best week of the season, and makes for a really nice correlation with Mariota. And neither one is going to come with that much ownership. So I like Mariota. Next up, right below him, Dallas Goedert. Now, a similar reason that I didn't mention with Kyle Pitts is these guys below them, Zach Ertz, Tyler Higbee, and TJ Hawkinson. These guys are all going to come with more ownership than these guys, and they're cheaper. So I think Pitts and Goddard, both of their ownership is going to stay put, I would think. Last week, Goddard had 5 catches on 6 targets for 82 yards. He hasn't been in the end zone yet. So if he adds, a touchdown reception to his game last week, he's pushing 20 points. That's absolutely possible that could be the highest scoring tight end play on the slate. So I like these guys in the mid-range here. Kyle Pitts, Dallas Goedert. I think either one of these guys are absolutely in play. And then we're going to end it with the cheapie here. There's a lot of high-priced guys on the slate that we're going to want to play. So if you need some salary relief, there's worse places to do it than the tight end position. And you can see Juwan Johnson playing 76% of the Saints' offensive snaps. He's got at least 5 targets in both games, with 7 targets last week. He's not a guy that is he doesn't have 20-point potential, but he can get you 40 yards on a few catches and maybe sneak in the end zone. And if he does that at 2,900, oh man, you're sitting pretty. If he can get 10, 11, 12 points, you're doing really nice. And even if he gets these 6 points or 8-point games like he's had the last 2 weeks, that doesn't kill you because he's only 2,900, and that allows you to pay up at other positions. So I think if you're going cheap, I like Juwan Johnson. All right, that's going to do it. If you're not already in our Discord, I'll drop a link in the description of this video. We have a really fun and knowledgeable community, so whether you play fantasy, bet props, or just want somewhere to talk about the games, I think you'll really enjoy our server. So get in the Discord, and good luck on week 3.